And I go, hi, this is Frank Rodriguez Villela, and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. I do traveling. I get to hang out with great talented people and people that I know.
Yeah.
I've known this cat for like 10 years,
Yeah.
right? At least 10 for sure, if not more. But we also knew people, a lot of the same people probably
Yeah.
in LA. And so this is a great luthier, Manuel Delgado. And I'm just really happy that we connected through shows, trade shows, but really educational music shows. And so this is a bona fide luthier. He's a cat that. So I always think it's funny how music takes us to different places. I think once we meet and once we get to know each other, it's like we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
And I think in music, it's a little different. Don't you think? It's like you create a certain bond, and it's just like it's pretty immediate. I think so. But Manuel, I just wanted to ask. I do this station. I mean, I do this channel. I always say station. I do this channel, and I really just want to let people know about all the different kind of. I guess I'm not just going to say jobs because I don't. For us, it's not a job. To us, it's a love. But it's
opportunities
yeah,
maybe in the music industry.
Exactly, and there's a lot of guys that just love the instrument, and there's a lot of people who inspire to be guitarists and musicians, and then all of a sudden they find another love. And I know you played, but you come from a whole family of luthiers, right? So,
Yes.
So I want to know your background. Like what started you in just music in general?
All right. Well, first of all, great to see you, brother.
Oh, thank you.
And we have so many things that overlap because we both know people from in the music that are musicians, whether it be Texas or LA or New York or whatever.
Right.
We're both
Or Nashville.
Yeah, Nashville now. We're both involved in helping to spread education, music education specifically.
Right.
So and then we were just having a long conversation before we started this about all the so we cross over on several paths. And I know what you mean. I always say with certain people, and you're one of them, I always say, I've known you my whole life, but we're just now meeting, even though we've known each other for 10 years. So when we met, it was instant, like you said. It's like, oh, okay, this is one of my brother from another mother right here. So,
right,
yeah.
Right. It has a feeling. Because we were talking to, I was talking to a producer yesterday, and he's up originally from the East Coast, but there's just all these people that sort of go in their lives. And they're like, oh, I know. So, oh, you met him?
Yeah.
And it's an amazing. It's like you almost, if you would have waited, like maybe you were in a room and you would have waited another 5 minutes, you would have met that guy.
Yeah.
But you had to leave because you were doing something else.
Yep.
So what started you? I mean, what started you into the music?
So, as you mentioned, I've been blessed to grow up in a family that is a family of luthiers. So our business started back in 1928 with my grandfather and my great uncle in Torreon, in Coahuila, in Mexico. Yeah. So they started back then. They moved the business eventually to Juarez in the 30s. Okay. My father was actually born. He was technically born in El Paso at a hospital, but he was raised and registered in Juarez. So on paper, he was born in Juarez. And then they brought the business to Los Angeles in 1948. I'm the first generation born in the United States, but grew up from the time I was 4 or 5 years old. My dad would let us come into the shop and make toy rubber band guns or cars or little miniature guitars. Now I know as a dad, now I get it. He was like letting us get used to working with the tools. And then when I was 7, I started doing repairs. I was the one that followed in his footsteps, and anything from just changing out machine heads, some simple stuff, but I was learning to be around the instruments, how to set them on the bench, how to hold them properly, things like that. And I started playing when I was 5, but I was brought up on classical guitar. And then my dad, who was baptized in a guitar shop and made his first guitar when he was 14, I beat his record, and I made my first instrument when I was 12. So I've been at this, for 45 years, you could say, from the time I started doing repairs. Okay. And now I have 2 amazing daughters who've beat my record. They both built their first instrument when they were 9. So
there it is.
Yeah.
And so with me, Pepe Langoria.
Yeah.
From Houston.
Yep. Love Pepe.
Yeah. So we're like when we mentioned that, it was so nice, the fact that that your daughters are following in your footsteps.
Well,
And
another,
that's a hard thing to get your kids to do. Is to
yeah.
get you do.
And again, another area where you and I know him as Jose, you know, Pepe,
Oh, yeah.
but you and Jose and I overlap. Jose is always posting how proud he is of his son and his kids and everything they're doing. Every time when you and I talk, you're telling me about your kids, you know. So I think we're just proud papas as well.
That's
so
true. As we developed, but for a child to sort of see what dad is doing, and then so you must have done the same with your father, right? As soon as you see him do stuff, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Did you ask him like, "What are you doing?" or how do you?
I don't remember necessarily asking him, but I was just around it all the time, and I loved my dad, and we just spent a lot of time together. And you know, when I went to school, I went to a school in East Los Angeles in Boyle Heights. So my dad and I would drive in together. And my dad used to train the LAPD boxing team, so I would come in early, train with the guys, take a shower, walk to school.
You mean train?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Walk to school, and then when I got out of school, walk to the shop, do my homework, and then when I was done with my homework, work on some instruments or play guitar for a little while, and then we would drive home together. So we were together from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. You know, 12 hours. And
awesome.
we had this thing where if people are from Los Angeles, Southern California, they'll know what the references I'm referring to. But because the shop was in Boyle Heights and we lived in Hacienda Heights, we would cross when we were coming home on the 60 freeway, whenever we passed,
the Pomona freeway.
yeah, whenever we passed the 605, my dad would turn and say, "Hi, mijo," and I'd say, "Hey, papi," because that was like our joke, like, okay, now we're gonna leave everything that happened, we're leaving that behind, and now we're back to getting ready for family life kind of thing.
Oh, that's funny.
And it was also a great lesson, you know. I always say that my dad was teaching me life lessons in the way, even in building, you know, he would always say, start with the end in mind, and, you know, make sure that don't fight the grain. The wood is going to tell you what direction it wants you to work it, and it'll tell you what it wants. And so there was a lot about respecting what you're doing. Not that everything in life is to be easy, but if you're fighting, maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe try turning it around and see if going with the grain in this situation is the best thing. You know, and again, when you're a kid, you're just getting the literal message that's being told to you. Right. But as you get older, then you're understanding the philosophical of what he was teaching me. So
that's so smart.
Yeah,
that's a smart thing about. Well, I mean, because I think of since I work on instruments also, and I look at them and I have to figure out what's going to make them sound better. But I look at them like little creatures.
Yeah,
yeah. You know? And I look at, especially if you look at something, you look at the grain, or you look at things, and you know, and I love music. Music is one of the things that I've always loved, because just you know, that's just what I did. But when my favorite thing was to hang out with luthiers and mechanics.
Yeah.
My life, because I could figure out to do things. And it's not that musicians can't, don't get me wrong, guys.
Right.
You know, musicians are smart guys too. But I'll tell you, when your car's broken down in the desert and you got to figure out what's to move, or what you need to move to make it work, it's almost the same as just, okay, what do you need? What is it, you know? And I've been caught in those situations, which won't be talked about right now.
But that's how my brain works. That's how my dad's brain worked, you know? So when I was probably about maybe 8 or 9, my dad opened up a couple of different locations, which he would have to go back and forth for. We had our shop was originally on Brooklyn Avenue. Then it moved
East LA, right?
East LA, Boyle Heights.
Right.
Then it moved to Sunset Avenue, 1066 Sunset Boulevard. You know, not in Hollywood, in LA.
Oh, still like LA proper.
Yeah, okay, across street from the Department of Water and Power. We used to walk to the Bonaventure when we were kids, and
so,
you know,
close to Placita Olvera.
Yeah, exactly. Not too far from there. Yeah. And then he opened up a shop in Hollywood. Well, when we opened up the shop in Hollywood, also on Sunset, a block away from the original Guitar Center. Now it takes up the whole block, but it used to be across the street from where it is now, one small location. So we were across the street and over one, in between.
What was the name of what was it? Was it Delgado?
Candelas. Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, and we were around the corner from Freedom Guitar, and Norm's Rare was over there, you know, all that stuff. Carvin, yep, Mesa Boogie was on the corner. But when we opened up that shop, shortly after opening it, the fire department told my dad, no, you can't have a shop here. So it was like, well, he just locked into this lease. So it ended up being more like a store. And we could do minor things like string changes, if we had to work,
Repairs.
yeah, work on electronics, whatever, but we couldn't like build their spray, do all those things that we wanted to do. But next door to us was a gentleman that took in electronics and he would fix them. And if I got bored, I'd go into the back where we all had like a little horseshoe parking lot behind off of Sunset where everybody parked, and there was a dumpster there. And I'd pull the stuff out of the dumpster that he had thrown away, and I would fix it. And some of the stuff I didn't even know what it was, but that's how my brain would work. And I remember my dad would walk me over next door afterwards, and he said, "Hey, what is this machine?" Because he didn't know what it was either. It was like some weird, like a electronic stenography machine. I remember was one of the first ones. And the guy says, he said, "Well, this is what it is." And he says, "But it's broken." And he said, "No, my son fixed it." And the guy's like, looking at this 8-9-year-old punk, like, "What? No." And he said, "No, my son fixed it. He pulled it out of the dumpster." And so the guy gets it, plugs it in, and sure enough, I had fixed it. And he's looking at me like, "What the?" But that's how my brain has always worked. So anything like doing puzzles, Sudoku, that kind of stuff, mechanics, that's what my brain relaxes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, that's because we were just talking earlier. We talked about how, we got to make, and this was yesterday too, where we have to figure out what it takes to get something done. But it's hard to fix things when you don't have the tools to fix them. So you have to even make the tools.
Right.
So that's like a different, that's a mindset.
Yeah.
But see, you did it with fixing things.
Yeah. And my grandfather used to always say, like, if you can't build it, you probably don't need it. That was his, because, he grew up in an era where if they needed something, they pretty much had to make it themselves. So, I've always carried that. So it's hard when, you walk into, I won't call out any of these places, but you walk into like a furniture store and, my wife's like, "Oh, I want that entertainment center." "Oh, okay." And I go and I look at it and it's like $3,000. And I'm like, damn thing's just plywood. And it's just, I can make this. I'll go to Home Depot, spend $350 on materials and I'll build it myself.
Exactly. It's just being able to get the perception of what things like. Okay, so you mentioned in 1928 is when the business started.
Yes, sir.
So it was your grandfather was already doing stuff before then, right?
So my grandfather and my great uncle are who started the business, and my grandfather was already working as a carpenter, doing like furniture and things like that. But he was also a musician, and people would bring him instruments and ask him to repair them.
Right.
And at first, the way he told me the story is like he'd kind of be like, "Well, I don't do this, I do this," and they're like, "Well, it's wood, come on." So he started, getting a reputation for being able to fix them. And then somebody challenged him. They had like a fair in there, una feria in there, and they challenged him to build one, and he did. And then he sold it. Then he built another one.
So what year was that? Do you know?
That's where they're like 28 is the official, like when they started doing stuff like that.
Okay, well, 28. So that means he probably started like in 1910.
Not that early, because they were very young.
They were young. Oh, that's right.
You got to remember too, people from other countries.
That's right.
They get to work early. We're spoiled here in the United States, where these young folks don't know how well they have it, where they have the luxury of going to middle school and high school, and then some of them college, and where in other countries people are, by the time they're 12, 13, even younger. I was in Mexico a few years ago on a business trip. And I remember during the week, so it was in the middle of the weekday when normally a child would be at school, and I stopped off at this little restaurant, makeshift restaurant, and it was the abuelita, the mom, and her daughters. And one of the daughters was the age of my daughter, like 8 years old, and she was my waitress, and she was a pro. Brought me everything, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, look at this 8-year-old girl, she's running the show here. So other countries, they're starting things off a lot earlier.
That's right.
So they would have been probably early teenagers when they got started. Mm-hmm.
So they were like already, so that's why the business, so they were young workers,
yes,
luthiers.
Yeah, I think my grandfather passed in 99, and I think he was 86, so he would have been right around 1913 born.
Born 1913.
So that would put him at about 15 years old in 1928, yeah.
So during the Depression and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an amazing time. So they were able to stay, because during those times, if you're Mexicano and you lived here, I mean, a lot of them were, the stories where they were getting
Oh yeah.
deported back to Mexico for the fact that there was a lack of jobs.
Yep.
So they were able to stay in America and do stuff.
Yeah, my great uncle ended up going back to Mexico for a little while, but by choice. He missed, so he left. My grandfather stayed and grew the business. My grandfather was always more of like the true luthier, meaning he just loved the work. Unless it was somebody he knew, if somebody walked in, he'd kind of be like, I gotta go take care of this person. He just wanted to build, and he was very creative. And my great uncle was more of the like the social butterfly and the more of the entrepreneurial businessman. But you're right; they would have been in L.A. during the Zoot Suit Wars, if you ever heard about those. Where a lot of the military, Navy specifically, they beat up a lot of Chicanos. Right. Just out of racism.
I know the story.
Yeah. So, and when they first moved into that neighborhood, there was Brooklyn Avenue. It was predominantly Jewish, right?
Is it that I was close to Lalo Guerrero's, right? The club.
Yeah.
Because I worked there. For
oh, really?
Years.
Yeah. Yeah. We were next to the Paramount. The Paramount used to be there when we first, when I grew up. At least I remember it was a nightclub.
Right.
Of course, Los Lobos are from that area.
Oh, yeah.
Jackson Brown's from Highland Park, not too far away. Or I think he was born in another country and then he moved as a young adult or a young teenager to Highland Park. So that was that whole LA scene. It was
that middle section, that little area.
War and all those bands were all doing their thing.
But it's sort of funny because you've had a lot of like the Blasters were from there.
Yeah,
there was like a punk band. I remember the Blasters.
Yeah, one of the guys' name is Manny.
Oh, is he? That's funny. Yeah, so God, that's like it's such a rich area, right? That's why luthiers and not just luthiers but music people can survive in a city that has so much. And then the diversity of the music.
Well, and then I grew up singing mariachi because my dad, my dad was a great singer. Grew up where we had customers anywhere from, Eddie Murphy to David Lee Roth to, trios to, Feliciano. So we had this mix. I loved punk when I was in middle school. I'd go to the Olympic Auditorium and go
Olympic, oh my gosh.
Go to all the punk bands there.
It's a church now,
Is it really?
Yeah, it's a church. I drove by not too long ago.
Wow.
It's a church.
But that whole area, or at least when I grew up, I was born in '71. So in that time, you had heavy metal, you had NWA, so Compton, that whole rap scene. So I had all these different music and I just like music. I don't like, if I hear something and I like it, I'm not like, oh wait, that's that genre of music. I'm gonna say I hate it. No, if I like it, I like it. I don't care. So I have a really wide range. And then my dad grew up loving opera, of course, the trio music, the Mexican music. My mom loved Motown. So I had all these different influences growing up. And that also helped shape who I am today, in addition to being born from two immigrant parents.
Do you see you're doing a lot of mariachi types. You do the instruments you work on.
Mm-hmm.
So your customer base is big on doing all the designing for guitarrones, for vihuelas, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so is your stuff is pretty consistent, right? Are you seeing any changes in anything you're doing musically as far as instruments are concerned?
Well, we work with a wide variety. I think a lot of depending on what circle you're talking to, they know us in a different way. So Buddy Guy is a customer of ours.
Okay.
Old Crow Medicine Show is customers of ours.
Oh, wow.
Who are bluegrass. So I can just list names. So I think a lot of people who know me in the world of mariachi think that that's all we do is mariachi. And that's one of our larger parts of our business is our division called La Tradición Music, where we work with the mariachi programs. That's right. But if you step into Delgado, I can point out artists who play our banjos or who play our Irish bouzoukis or who play our ukuleles or who play
I like doing these shows because I get to know so much of these guys.
Yeah, we have our own version of the Telecaster. We call them Delecasters, We have our own electric guitar models, So we do everything, but and this is how it's always been, because my grandfather, you know, from the Kingston Trio to Hoyt Axton, Arlo Guthrie, Feliciano, Andres Segovia, the Romeros, Theodore Beikel, these were all clients, and everybody I'm talking about are all different genres.
But Feliciano to me was far one of the big influences.
Yeah.
Here's a Hispanic musician, along with because and of course Freddie Fender, because he was in Texas, and but Feliciano had something. I mean, the way he was playing and everything he was doing, such an influence.
Yeah,
and
it was
nylon string guitar.
Yep, innovator.
And then he was doing the stuff he was doing. Sounds crazy, but you had to practice to get that good.
Yeah.
You know, you just couldn't get an amp and a guitar. It was like you had to really. So I would have admired him, and
for a lot of young people who don't know, Feliciano is blind.
Yeah.
So, and he plays percussion. He's from Puerto Rico. He plays the cuatro. You know, he could probably pick up anything and play. But he and my father were friends. He had 5 of our family's guitars, and he said his favorite one was one that my great uncle had built for him. And my early on, when he was just getting started, and my grandfather let him borrow a guitar and introduced him to a friend so he could be on a radio show in LA. So there's all these really cool stories and connections. And I remember we'd always get Christmas cards from him. He'd call the shop sometimes and I'd answer. He's just a sweet guy. But my father one time was helping this young man in the neighborhood right there in Boyle Heights who was blind, and the mom would bring him by and my dad would sit with him and teach him a little bit on the guitar. And I remember at one point the young man was getting frustrated. He was probably like 12 or 13 years old. And my dad said, hang on a second. So he walked over to the phone, and we had a phone like the old rotary phones with the long cord on it. So he calls, and I hear him say, and then he walks over to the young man and he hands the phone to the mom, and the mom puts it up to his ear. And you can see the little boy's face kind of lights up, and then talk for a few minutes. And I'm in the back watching all this happen. Well, he had called Jose Feliciano and said, listen, I need you to talk to this kid. And he spoke some words of encouragement to him. And I think, if I remember correctly, that young man ended up playing for John Paul, the Pope, when he came through LA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So again, the point of all this is not like, oh, let me tell you about it's like to show you how an act of kindness or, something like this, how you don't know how it's going to affect somebody else. We'll talk a lot about Helen Keller, but what about the woman who was her teacher? You know what I mean? And the struggle that woman had and what she did. If that woman hadn't existed, we wouldn't know about Helen Keller. So it's kind of those things.
And it's it's just the kindness, and then what you continue doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, because your life has to be that. Because you were telling me that you have like the La Tradición.
Yeah.
And so La Tradición is based for. It's a community based.
Well, Delgado Guitars is really we're the everything. But yes, all of our businesses. They say leadership starts at the top, so it's the same way. Like our model has to be, it's always about community. It's community first. And if people looked at my business model, they'd go, oh my God, that's the worst business model in the world. Because we'll do things because it's the right thing to do. If we have the opportunity to help somebody, where other people will go, okay, let's look financially. Does this make sense? How are we going to market this? And that's not our goal. Our goal is, what can we do to make a difference? How can we help? And we've been very fortunate being involved here in Nashville, even getting some really cool things like being named like a Business of the Year I think it was in 2019, just for our community service. But whether it was the flood in 2010, the tornado in 2020, all these different things, we've tried to figure out a way. In fact, our live streams started because when the pandemic hit, I thought, how can we help our fellow artists? Because they can't gig right now, they can't tour. So I went out and bought all this equipment, learned how to do live streams, and we would host them here, and they could set up, like a virtual tip jar, so that we got sponsors, so we could at least give them $100. UPS was one of our sponsors, Visa, all these different people, and we didn't make any money off of that. It was, quite honestly, it cost me a lot of money, and it was a time suck, But from that, it was a way for us to give back to our community. So.
That's so good. The music community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it was, I mean, everybody struggled at that time, but you
Mhm.
gotta think. Then that's the whole thing of thinking out of the box. Thinking, like what can I do? Especially when that. I mean, there's a void,
Yeah.
during the pandemic. So, and did you stay busy during that time for you?
By the grace of God.
Yeah.
And so we had one of the largest school districts in the United States is one of our clients. And in October, prior 2019, I was helping them get their music program organized. And quite honestly, they had a bunch of instruments that anybody else would have just sold them a bunch of instruments. And I said, don't do that. We can take the parts off of the broken ones and use them on these other ones and fix them, save you money. So you're not paying for parts, you're just paying for labor. And I showed them the strategy. So they asked me to come and show them how to do it. So we spent like 4 days organizing, and then we put all the instruments aside that we thought were worth fixing and said, all right, now find somebody to fix them. And they had already said, well, we've already decided you're gonna fix them. So we loaded up an 18-wheeler full of orchestra and string instruments. And those got delivered here like in November, and it was in this room. It was literally from the ground up. I'll have to find an old photograph to show you.
Send it to me.
And I'm thinking, oh crap, what are we gonna, at the time we weren't doing a lot with the venue, so it was just filled with instruments. Well, then fast forward to March, we have our tornado that comes through here.
That's right.
And 6 days later, the pandemic. So everything shut down. So we were able to keep our doors closed, and we just worked on all the instruments that were in here.
Wow.
And that sustained us until about like July, August, and then
Of 2020.
of 2020. And then things were getting lean again. We had figured out a system for people to drop instruments off outstairs. We built a table outside, and then other couple who are friends of mine who have become friends with through working with them, but we're very good friends. They had built a brand new music room for their school. And while they were all off because of the pandemic, a pipe burst and flooded the room, destroying all of their instruments and their trajes. And we do trajes as well.
Right.
So we were able to, they reached out to us, and that insurance claim from that was something that we were able to fulfill. And that's what got us through into 2021. So, I'm a person of faith. There's no other way I can, there's too many things that have happened in my life to just say, oh, that's just a coincidence, or that's just, I know it's my hard work, and, what do they say? The harder I work, the luckier I get, right?
Exactly.
But I also know that some of these things, they can't be explained to me any other way than just, Dios me está cuidando. And, we're business people also. So, we post stuff, and of course, and you do all that, but when we're doing an act of kindness, I'm not like, oh, let me get my phone out and show the world this kind thing I'm doing. Right. It's like, we do it because that's the right thing to do. Yeah. If I was, smart for social media, I would do that.
This is funny. Here we are, we're doing a YouTube video, but people get to see it.
Well, this is different.
And I think but it's like, well, you're going to promote this, but there'll be a link to everybody's.
But this is different. We do a lot of, interviews like this, and we love to tell our story, and, this is different. But I mean, if I was like, anytime I wanted to do an act of kindness for somebody, my first instinct is to capture it on film. I feel like then it's disingenuous, You're not doing it for the right reasons. Yeah. If telling that story when we were out helping for the tornado, then we would post and say, hey, I'm over here on this street. If anybody's available, we need you to come over here. So we ended up using it as a way to communicate with our neighborhood. Right. We need people with chainsaws. We need water. These folks need to tarp their roof. We got a storm coming in 2 days. And we were, so we were managing all of that kind of stuff. So it can be a great tool in a lot of ways as well. It just depends on.
As long as you use it to do good, but not to inflate or brag about something.
Right.
And
that's the hard part, because when you're a small business, if I don't talk about who our clients are, how are you going to know? They're just going to think, oh, that's kind of cool. He's got a little shop over there, and he's doing something fun. It's like, no, we're known around the world.
It's real.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm very proud of. It's the hard work of my grandfather, my great uncle, who did it. They found an opportunity where they could do something that they enjoyed and make a business out of it. My father took it to the next level, And they say usually the third generation, they say the first one starts it, the second one builds it, and the third one kills it.
Oh.
And so for me, it's just been about honoring their legacy,
Right.
doing it in a way to where they can look down and be proud of what we're doing and what we're continuing,
Right.
and all of our extended family as well.
Right.
That they're not feeling that my tias, I don't want them to be angry at me because I'm not honoring the legacy of their father. But I don't do it like, oh, I better not it's just, that's how I was brought up.
Right.
And I think that they see that as well, that everything we're doing, it's intentional. And our family, we always say the most important word in family business is family.
Right.
So that goes for everybody. So we're making sure that we're doing it in a way to where they can feel that we're proud of what we're doing. We're trying to bring honor to the name.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Pepe and I are so proud that
Yeah.
your daughters,
Mm-hmm.
because they man, I'm just so impressed. Because obviously, in when you do, and I don't know if this is true. For the most part, I always see that a mariachi group, everybody's family. It's
Yeah.
like the brothers are playing, they're playing guitar, vihuela, one's playing guitarrón, but he also does, they all do everything, right? One plays the violin, they can all play all the instruments.
Right.
And so, but it's always family.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a family. You're not trying to say, hey, let's see if we can get somebody.
Yeah.
It's not, it's like, come on, Pablo, we're going. Come
Yeah.
on, mijo. come on, son, it's time to go. And so it was, the mariachi part, I respect that because it's just something that the whole, in the family, like Longorias, right? Longoria.
Yeah.
So you have, and then in Houston you have
And I think,
Gonzalez.
isn't Jose's oldest son teaching now?
Yeah,
or
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
what you want.
And but in LA there was Hernandez,
Uh-huh.
El Pedro Rey.
Yeah.
The guy, those camperos, right? Camperos, Mariachi Sol.
Well, Mariachi Sol de Mexico. So yeah, Los Camperos was Naticano, but you're right. Pedro Hernandez used to be with Los Camperos.
Los
Jose
Camperos.
Jose played with them, and
Jose,
then
trumpet player.
and then he started Mariachi Sol de Mexico,
Right,
which
right.
and then he has Las Adelitas, a female group.
Right,
But so there's all these cool things that are popping up.
And and you connected it with community, doing stuff with them.
Yeah.
I mean,
But you see it in education too, like Eddie Padilla over in San Antonio, and his son is teaching now as well, or John Nieto, and he's literally like there teaching his children. His daughter, I think, is a sophomore or a junior now. So in the next couple of years after she graduates, he's going to retire.
Right.
So it's like, here's this man who dedicated himself to teaching, and he's a great educator to all. All of his students love him, as well as the community. But even his children are playing mariachi, and now one of them has gone into the same field as dad. He's a teacher now, and
Right.
the daughter is probably going to do something similar as well. So, but they've dedicated their life to this craft for their family. And once his daughter graduates, then it's kind of like, okay, I can step away now because I've seen my kids through what they're supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah, even with my girls, I don't want them to continue in this if it's not something they're passionate about. I want them to be happy with whatever they do.
Right.
One of the things that was hardest, I guess, about making the move from LA to Nashville is what you're talking about. We don't have a huge like mariachi community here in Nashville. It's starting, but so my girls haven't had the opportunity to be able to go to all these different conferences and be a part of all these different things. It would require me pulling them out of school and taking them to another state. So I wanted to make sure that they were also proud of growing up with their Mexican heritage. And obviously you can't be a part of this business and not know what our heritage is about. So the fact that they took an interest at an early age and started helping me in the shop as well, and then eventually, built their instrument, that's great to me. But what they're going to choose to do long term, and I say this with all sincerity, if this dies with me, if I'm the last one and we shut it down, I'm okay with that. I really am. As long as they're doing something that they're happy about. Should they choose to, then good for them. But
I know it's a commitment, and you got to say, but Dad, I don't want to do this. Okay, that's good. Just do something.
Yeah.
And I think in general, and it's just for, because people that do watch my channel, it's like they're people that are figuring out, okay, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, and at the end, you should be doing stuff that really makes you happy.
Yeah, and it's hard work. We were talking about this yesterday, right? Hey, how many hours straight have you driven?
Yeah.
I've driven 20. Oh, I've driven 23. How about you? Oh, I drove 36 once and slept 2 hours. Oh, I did. You know, we're literally, you're working hard.
You're driving.
I have a saying. I don't pray harm against my enemies. I pray they'll open a small business. Because that'll get them. Because it's hard work. It is hard work.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, it's not just if I just got to sit and whittle wood all day long and somehow bills got paid and money came in and food got on the table, that'd be great, but that's not the reality.
Yeah.
I'm having to navigate emails and this thing and I got to get that and what happened with that product and wait a minute, we got, you know, it's
Actually,
a lot of
probably the doing of the wood, you know, as because sometimes it's just the most relaxing thing.
That's where my happy place.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because I was musical director for an artist in Los Angeles, and we flew all over the place, and it was a good gig. I'd hired great musicians, but since I was musical director, I had to deal with all this other stuff.
All the drama.
And then, but the funny thing is that once I would I was writing something on a sheet of paper, and the musician asked me, "Well, what are you working on the set list for tonight?" I said, "No, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about the set list and who I'm going to get in 2 weeks, because I'm going to lose half of the band." Because I would write music, and so I was always the director, and then I would only can count on 2 people. So my brain was already thinking on 3 weeks.
Right.
3 weeks, it's done. When I hit the stage, I'm playing, I'm having fun. And now it's the same thing with working on instruments. That's like my getaway.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, things that I learned from my father when he would train the police officers, and I'd be his second in the corner with him as a kid. And I remember one of the guys had never boxed before, so he spent months training with my dad. And then they would do this event called the Fight for Life, where the LA County Sheriff's Department would fight the LAPD, and they would raise money for St. Jude's Children's Hospital.
Right.
So all for a great cause.
Like in the 80s, right? So,
well, even in the 90s, yeah.
Okay.
But I remember, this was in the 80s, I remember one of the guys walks, you know, they go out and all right, you know, we're going to have a clean fight. You know, they're given the rules, touch gloves, to walk back. And then the guy turns to my dad and he says, "What do I do?" And my dad says, "Well, what do you mean, what are you done? The work is done. So pray. If you don't know what to do now, start praying, because you've already done the work." So it's kind of like the same thing. Like, you do the work, so when that moment comes, you're ready. Right. You know, for you, it was you wanted to be ready to be able to enjoy and take in that moment. You didn't want to have to be worrying about tomorrow night I got to get the set list. No, you already had all that done.
That's already done. That's already done. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. You know, my passion when I was growing, because I moved to LA in the late 70s, I was into boxing. Boxing. I loved like Salvador Sanchez, Duran, that whole. But even before that, my dad was into boxing.
Yeah.
So I loved that. So when I went to LA, so when you said it, I go, oh, that's something I.
Well, the man who trained my dad and trained us as well, his name was Louis Jauregui. He was a friend of my grandfather's, and he was a professional fighter and wrestler at one point. But he also trained Armando Muniz.
Oh yes.
That was his trainer. Oh, wow. So that's who we learned from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's who I grew up learning.
See, it's so funny because we're so connected, and we like, there's just little things that sort of make me tick.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and then again, you talk about connections. So his daughter, Louis Jauregui's daughter, Melinda, went to school with the guys from the Delgado brothers, the blues band.
Oh.
Joey and all those guys. You probably know them, right? Yeah. So there's another connection right there, you know.
So funny. So small, you know. But of course, LA with the boxing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like where everybody.
Yeah, my dad's fighters used to train with De La Hoya. You know, they would if they needed a sparring partner. You know, yeah. So Martina Marias, who's was like a son to my dad, and he ended up marrying my cousin Emma. But Martin was, you know, one of my dad's fighters, and he trained with all these guys. He fought in the Pan Am Games, you know, for the Olympics, and you know, so.
That's funny.
Our family doesn't do things halfway. It's like, you know, we don't. Oh, let's take up this hobby. Next thing you know, my dad says, "Oh, we're gonna have a fighter in the Olympics."
Yeah.
Orale.
Well, you know, it's just like, you know, there's so many stories, and I mean, those stories can be, you know, I think people always want to say, okay, well, this group of people does this, or no, this group of people has done a lot of things, and you know, obviously the boxing is always just to get it out of get out of where you are, you know,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully to progress your family's life and your life.
Yeah.
And then
My father was in the military,
that's the other thing I was going to say.
so he served in the army during the Vietnam conflict. He was in Germany, so he didn't see any combat, but he was during. But the reason I bring it up is because of what you just said. I wanted to go into the Marine Corps. And I remember I was ready to sign the paper, but my dad was 6'5". They didn't build Mexicans that big back then.
Wow.
6'5", you know, brought us up boxing, loved him, but I also had a healthy respect and fear for my dad. And I thought, if I signed it, I was more afraid of my dad than the U.S. military. I was more, you know, they were pushing me, sign the paper. I said, no, if I don't get my dad's permission, I was 18 years old, I could have signed it.
Right.
But I remember I went and I talked to him, and he said, you know, mijo, if you want to do it, you can do it. But he said, but I did that so you wouldn't have to. Like he did it because he needed, you know, a way to, he did ROTC in high school and he wanted to travel a little bit, and that gave him opportunities that otherwise he couldn't have afforded to have had. But for us, he didn't want us to have that. So the same thing with the boxing. I wanted to box, and my dad was like, you know, that's not really what I want you to do. You know, use your head, not your hands. And which is the irony is boxing is actually a very smart sport because it teaches you a lot. But he just meant that he wanted me to do something different. You know.
Well, it's just like it's about not getting hit.
Yeah.
You
Trying
know?
to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, not getting hit.
Yeah.
And and those are my favorites. Salvador Sanchez, and there's another guy right now that's really good, Dimitri Bivol, Russian guy. But they don't get hit. They know how to move.
And the same thing, and again, this can also be like a life lesson. The irony is, when I learned how to box, I no longer wanted to fight someone, because then I said, I can really hurt this person.
Yeah.
Which is, the irony was, before somebody got me mad, I'd want to beat them up.
Yeah.
And now it's like, man, if, you know, I'll do everything I can to try to save this person from, you know, me having to hit them, because if I hit them, it's gonna be gonna be bad.
Funny, like it's obviously there's a release in boxing. You're training and you're hitting a bag and you're doing things that are releasing.
Yeah, I love it.
And in music, I mean, it's sort of crazy because you know, I do things with programs, sort of rehab programs, and I go in there and teach, and I could see, I've been thinking, music is great. For lots of reasons, it's great release, but for some people, it's been the release from really bad families.
Yeah.
You know, addictions, just, you know, bad situations, and to be put in that situation where you're playing and you're really using an instrument to that release. And so boxing is probably the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate we've been a part of different organizations, and I've sat on boards and even with soldiers with PTSD, where, you know, like they have an opportunity to songwrite, and it's very therapeutic for them. It's a way for them to express themselves without sitting down and, you know, saying, well, this is what happened, and, you know, they can just tell it through their music, through and the great thing about music is, I think I can't remember what the quote is, but it says something like, you know, music says what words can't, basically, you know, so you can express yourself just through the notes themselves. You don't even have to add lyrics to it. Just the music itself can be the explanation or the story you're telling.
Yeah, it's a frequency, huh?
Yeah.
It's a vibration.
Yep.
You know, and actually, one place I do go is a place where there's a lot of veterans there, and I always wanted to do that. You know, I wanted to be able to go to the, you know, and there's a venue that does that. So
is that here?
That's in Texas. Actually, it's in Egypt, Texas.
Oh wow, okay, because there's a place here also for soldiers.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a place, and it just turned out to be you know, and the funny thing is, the guy who got me that job and sort of connected me to that, you know, lives here in Nashville. Lives here in Brentwood, so I'll probably see him tonight and hang out a little bit.
I'll have to connect you with the one here. I wonder if he's connected with that organization.
He might be. He does a lot of stuff on the national level. So look, you're doing great.
Thank you, brother.
You know, like me, Manuel and I go back. But it was when I was talking to Jose. I want to interview Manuel. He goes, yeah, I mean, because we know each other.
Yeah.
But then as we start to talk, you give me that story of. So we have a lot of sort of in common. those interests, you know.
Yeah.
And the drive with the, you know, I think it's like, I think you touched on the really important parts, which is the community. It's you know, and I think anything I do, you know, I just, you know, I love where I am. You know, my father just passed, so I had to move to my mom's side of, I'm helping my mom and I helped my dad during all this time. So I had to unplug myself from my community for a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and that has to happen.
And that's healthy. You
Yeah.
know, I moved my mom here a few years ago. She was in LA, and during the pandemic, she was home and started slurring her words, and, you know, she had a stroke. There was nobody there advocating for her.
Right.
So I finally, you know, it was hard because she didn't want to leave there. She'd been in that house for 50 some odd years. It's the house I was born in, you know.
Yeah.
But now she's here, she's happy, you know, she's got my daughters here, she loves where she's at.
Oh, good.
But you give up something to do something else. That doesn't mean that what you're doing is taking away, you know. I know I could be doing more for my own physical health, or I could be doing more in the business, or I could be on a different board. But no, my mom is like, you know, I don't regret any moment I spend with her,
Yeah, right,
you know.
right.
So, and I want to have that time with her. Same thing, my kids, you know, they're in soccer now, and that takes a lot of time for my wife and I. So, which means we don't do this other thing. But you know what? You only have them. Yours are already out of the house. Mine, I still got them. So I want to enjoy every moment I can with them, because once they're gone, they're gone. But the point of all this is, no matter what you choose to do in life, I think a lot of people, especially if you come from humble background. I never thought we were poor growing up, because we had everything, you know. We thought we had what we needed. We didn't have, you know, big fancy cars and all this stuff, but I felt like we were really rich.
Yeah, exactly.
But we weren't, you know, but we weren't, you know, but the house that was created for us, you know, we felt like we had everything. And my parents still gave back. I learned that model from them. Because they would have people in our home for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or whatever it might be. But again, the point being that no matter what it is you're doing, you have to do it for a reason greater than yourself. And if that reason greater than yourself is money, you're not going to be happy. You're going to be empty, you know. So it's got to be something greater.
It's like, I guess it's growing up, and I felt the same way. It's that we have what we need, not what we want.
Amen. Yep.
You know, and it's really hard to explain. You know, we want all these things, but you don't need those things.
Mm-hmm.
You need it's a famous. I might edit this out, but there's a place where everybody goes shop in Houston. It's called the Galleria. It's really fancy. All the Houston rappers go out there and buy their jewelry and stuff. Yes, they buy everything. It's all those Gucci stores, whatever.
Right.
And I always say, that's that area, that mall. Everything you don't need is there.
Right. Amen.
You know, I think we touched on great things.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you.
Brother.
Thank you for doing this.